Welcome to the Devil's Digest Week 9 game preview of Arizona State at Colorado. My name's Nick Borgia. Alongside me is publisher Ho Urbino, and we'll be taking a look at the Saturday evening contest as the Sun Devils will look to get back on track after losing to Stanford last week in Palo Alto. Ho, before we take a deep dive into the offense, we got to start with the surface level stuff. Obviously, interim head coach Sean Aguano will be making the offensive play calling instead of offensive coordinator Glenn Thomas this week. And then on top of that, we don't know who's going to start at quarterback. Could be Emory Jones or could be Trenton Bourguet, who led the Sun Devils to their lone Pac-12 victory over Washington just a few weeks ago. So with those things in mind, how do you think this shakes up this ASU team?
Well, I'll tell you what, Nick, I think the definition of insanity obviously is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I think a shake-up, a shot in the arm was definitely needed for this Arizona State offense. Granted, Glenn Thomas did call a bad game against Stanford last week, especially in the second half. The fact that ASU did not score in the last 44 minutes out of 60 of a football game against a Stanford defense who is not by any means one of the better defenses in the conference. That really says a lot. But I also think in all the games preceding that contest last week that Glenn Thomas's play calling in many instances really left a lot to be desired. And I think that you do have to walk that fine line between being creative but not reinventing the wheel, not putting so much on the player's plate, especially if you don't have a bye week as far as extra practices to prepare, but at the same time to really increase the chances that you're going to show more and more looks on offense to Colorado that they have not seen on film, that they have not been able to prepare for. I think it's something that definitely can help the Sun Devils in this road contest this weekend. In terms of the starting quarterback, I won't be shocked at all if it is going to be Trenton Bourguet that's going to be the starter. I still think Emory Jones did deserve to start the Stanford game and did deserve also to finish the first half. But in the second half, yes, I think he should have been replaced just because of how futile the offense was. And if you and I are seeing it, then obviously the coaching staff is able to see that much more. And a lot of people thought that Trenton Bourguet did have some momentum after that Washington game going into bye week where he led Arizona State to a win, that he really should have played at least some of the game at Stanford. So now you're able to correct the wrong, if you will, and have him start against Colorado. Who's going to be a definitely comfortable opponent. I'm afraid to say winnable game because that's exactly what we said this time last week against Stanford. But this is definitely an opportunity for Arizona State to get a victory and for Trenton Bourguet really to display some of the skills, some of the traits that he showed in that win against Washington. I think the biggest thing is that you just really don't want the apathy to sink that much more into this team. We talked about this going into the Stanford game, that you had, again, hate to say it, 2 winnable games, that if you come up victorious, now you're 4-4 going into the week in November. Your whole outlook of the season is totally different. The whole vibe around the team is absolutely 180 degrees turn from what it was from just a few weeks ago. But I feel that now on the flip side, after you lost to Stanford last week, if you lose this week at Colorado, this can be really quite the tailspin in November. And the apathy can sink in the locker room, definitely can really be radiated from the fan base. So if nothing else, I think Sean Aguano is showing that he's not apathetic and he really wants to prevent that apathy as much as you want. And even though you're this late in the season, to have pretty significant changes happening on offense is really something that needs to be done. We obviously can't sit here and say it's going to be a sure recipe for success, but I do like the thinking behind those changes we're going to see this weekend in Boulder.
All right, well, if we take a step back and look at the offense as a whole and how they match up against Colorado, this Colorado defense is almost a carbon copy of what they saw in Stanford. The Sun Devils saw in Stanford last week. Weaker against the rushing attack, give up more rushing yards, maybe a little bit stronger with the pass, but how do you think that'll shake out for the Sun Devils as they take on a similar style of defense?
Well, slight correction, Nick. Their run defense actually is worse than Stanford, if you can believe it. Stanford was averaging, was averaging 197 yards yielded. The Colorado is averaging 253. Every program that faced Colorado this year was pummeling them to the ground early and often. Now, as we know, even though the stats were what they were, Arizona State wasn't exactly able to impose their will on the ground or really in the air for that matter against Stanford. So you like to think that there's going to be some kind of different approach, and that goes back to now Sean Aguano being the play caller rather than Glenn Thomas, that really can ensure more success on the ground, because there is no reason whatsoever that ASU, with all the talent that they have in the backfield, that they cannot really have that average number show up on the stat sheet and not to run less than 200 yards this Saturday. Now, I think the interesting element over here is that now you have Trent Bourget as a quarterback, somebody who's definitely not going to punish you with his feet. He's not even close to being a dual threat quarterback. And I'm not mentioning that as a negative, but if you are going to have an offensive game plan that's really going to be heavily reliant on the run, how does that fit Bourget? Or does ASU really want to maybe to flip the script and thinking that this is a Colorado defense that's expecting ASU and really every opponent to run early, run often? Maybe you really start being more aggressive on first downs and actually passing the ball rather than running it. And again, that really feeds into Bourget's skill set to begin with. And if things don't go well with the game plan and with Bourget's playing, now you have Emory Jones on the bench. And if you do want to run the ball and run it effectively, and really also have an RPO scheme that can really hit Colorado in all their soft spots, well, you really on paper have the best quarterback to do that in Emory Jones. So I'm really curious to see how the change in quarterback really is going to change the philosophy of Arizona State, which, again, you just look at the stat sheet, there's no reason why ASU should really not be running the ball on first down, on second down, on third down for that matter, but not because of the quarterback that you're playing. We're going to see if Arizona State is going to try to be creative, and going back to my earlier point, maybe try not to be too over creative with your passing game, or really with your running game for that matter, because this is a defense that is going to give you a lot, and you just need to be smart enough to really take it and just really be very, very calculated in your measures, especially because of the potential change at quarterback this week.
So moving on to the defense now, ASU coming off a somewhat impressive performance against Stanford, didn't allow them in the end zone and ultimately lost on 5 field goals. But this is a Stanford offense that maybe wasn't as reflective of their record as everybody thought. Now the defense is going to take on a Colorado team that's not even averaging more than 14 points a game. So do you think this is a game where the ASU defense can really take a step up and shine?
Yeah, I think really this can be really reflective of the momentum of both of these units. Colorado's lone win was 2 weeks ago, 20-13 in overtime over Cal at home, and I'm not saying that they were maybe high stepping into Corvallis the next week, but they scored 9 points last weekend against Oregon State. An excellent Oregon State team, by the way, which we're going to get to see in about a month over here. But nonetheless, when you talk about who's coming with more momentum and more confidence, there's no doubt that it is the ASU defense, and they're obviously disappointed that as much as we're asked to carry the team last week at Stanford, that they weren't able to come back with the win. And now that they have a much weaker offense to contend with, I definitely expect them to really be dominant. And what you have to look at the Colorado offense is that their starting quarterback, Owen McCown, has been out ever since the Cal game, where he had to leave midway through the game, did not play last week at Oregon State, and some would actually point to that fact as why Colorado was not able to look better against Oregon State after they were able to get their first win of the year against Cal the week before. But their quarterback, JT Shroud, is a young quarterback, somebody who some will say that is better in relief than actually starting. And when he started last week, we saw what happened. So now he's having his second start against a defense which I think is just as strong as Oregon State's, if I'm being honest about it. And he's a quarterback that is easily rattled. So Colorado is really going to try to take as much pressure as they can off their quarterback, and they might have actually a chance or an opening, if you will, to actually do that, because their two best running backs should be coming off injury this week, Deion Smith and Alex Fontenot. Alex Fontenot is, I think, their best returning running back from 2021. So I'm expecting, just we're talking about ASU. I mean, are they going to be really run heavy just because of the defense that they're facing? Not that the ASU run defense is porous, and definitely not porous compared to Colorado, but I could see that with Shroud being the quarterback and now having your two best running backs potentially back in the lineup to see Colorado be very, very, very run heavy. And how does ASU contend with that aspect? But obviously, this is an ASU defense which has played his best game of the year last week. And again, now facing an opponent that's inferior to Stanford, I do expect them to be fairly dominant on Saturday too.
Well, if we look back to last week's game against Stanford, a lot of people thought that would be the golden opportunity for the Sun Devils to come out of the bye week and carry that momentum from the Washington win and perhaps start a little win streak. Didn't happen, but now we're here, this Colorado game, and people will probably think that this is the opportunity for the Sun Devils to kind of wash that bitter taste out of their mouth from that Stanford defeat last week.
Well, like I said, Nick, when we talk about winnable games, you almost have to be very, very careful when you mention that phrase, especially here in Tempe, because that Stanford game last week was absolutely winnable. And you like to hope that there's no hangover going into this Colorado game, and that's why what you alluded to earlier with the change of play calling from Glenn Thomas to interim head coach John Aguano, with a, I would say, probable quarterback change from Emory Jones to Dren Bourget, that now this team is able to avoid that hangover after such a disappointing loss at Stanford. Now look, when you look up and down the stat sheet, when you look up and down the roster, there's no doubt in my mind that there's one team you can legitimately say that is worse than ASU in the Pac-12, even with all the struggles of the Sun Devils. That is definitely this Colorado Buffaloes team. So this is a game that ASU absolutely has to win. Again, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, you don't want a big tailspin happening in November. You want to at least prove to yourself that if there's an inferior opponent that's on the other side of the line of scrimmage, that you're able to beat them, if not beat them soundly. The thing about Colorado is that you can say on the one hand they really came down to earth, really crashing down to earth, I would say, losing 42-9 in Corvallis last weekend after their first win of the year against Cal 2013 in overtime. But that game against Cal, what really caught my eye is it was loud. It was 50,000. There were 50,000 people in the stands, and maybe they wanted to see their own interim head coach, Mike Sanford, in his debut at Folsom Field. But it looks like the apathy that we're talking about, that we don't want to be setting over here in Tempe, is not even close to being the fact in Boulder. So you wonder how much push this home crowd can give Colorado, which again, a team that definitely got humbled last week, but you feel that maybe the spirit of believing is maybe stronger in Boulder than it is in Tempe these days. So I think that's a factor that definitely you have to take into consideration over here. And look, this is an ASU team that I believe dating back to last year, the 5 games that they played away from Tempe, including neutral sites, they are still winless in those contests. So to say that ASU really is the double-digit favorite as Las Vegas has them right now, I mean, I'm a little weary about that. But nonetheless, I think that with the changes that are going to have an offense that's really going to invigorate that side of the ball. As I mentioned about the ASU defense, they're coming off their best game of the year. I think now facing an opponent that's even inferior to Stanford, I don't see them not having the same level of success, even greater. But I think this game is going to be much closer than people think it is. I mean, maybe ASU is able to jump into a big lead, and Colorado tries to mount a comeback that's ultimately going to fall short. But I'm picking ASU to win this game 27-23.
All right, well, thank you so much, Hode, as always, for all your pregame, in-game, and post-game coverage. Keep it locked in at DevilsDigest.com. Also, drop a follow at Devils Digest on Twitter. For Hode Urbino and the rest of Devils Digest, I'm Nick Borgia. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you Saturday.